I was on my way to the meeting about my husband's inheritance when it happened. I had my hand on the car key, the engine barely clicking awake, when someone shouted, "Ma'am, don't start that engine. Your son, he forged your name." I froze. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they shattered the cold morning air, slicing through the quiet hum of suburban silence. I turned slowly, and there he was. A man in a frayed coat, face weathered, eyes wild but not unfocused. He held up a piece of paper like it was a burning truth. A scan. A copy. It had my signature. My name. Power of attorney. And it wasn't mine. "Hello. My name is Margot Bennett. I'm 67 years old. I live alone now, in the house my late husband Walter and I bought 40 years ago. I make a quiet cup of tea every morning, fold my towels just so, and until recently I believed I had raised a decent man. His name is Nathan. He's my son. But that morning, when the man on the curb held up that document, and my name stared back at me from a signature I never signed, that's when I realized something had broken, and it had been breaking for longer than I dared admit. If you've ever had a moment that cracked the truth wide open, if you've ever looked at your child and realized you no longer recognized what you raised, then stay with me. This is not just a story about inheritance. It's about the cost of silence. It's about the moment a mother decides, enough. Make yourself a warm drink. If this story finds you, perhaps it's time. And while you're here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell. You won't want to miss what came next. The man waved the paper like a flag of war, but his voice trembled. "He copied your power of attorney, ma'am. He filed it last week. I was at the print shop. He paid cash. Said his mother couldn't make it in. I didn't know him. But something in his eyes. They didn't beg. They warned." I stepped away from the driver's seat, left the engine untouched. The sun hadn't fully risen, but I could feel sweat bloom under my scarf. I looked down at my boots, still polished, still steady, and realized I was shaking. I opened the document. It was a POA, all right. My name, Nathan Bennett's as recipient, and at the bottom, a neat, clean signature that mimicked mine just enough. But not the way I curl my tea, not the way Walter used to joke it looked like a treble clef. This was a performance, a son pretending to be a man, playing puppeteer with a pen. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply folded the page, slipped it into the inside pocket of Walter's old gray coat, the one with his initials stitched into the cuff. Then I turned around and walked back toward the house, not toward the meeting. Not yet. Behind me, the homeless man didn't follow. He only said one more thing. He shouldn't be the one deciding where you live. And that was when I knew this wasn't just a legal meeting. It was a silent ambush, an erasure of me. I stepped back inside the house, removed my gloves, and sat on the small bench by the window. The air inside smelled like cedar and the faint trace of lemon oil from the night before. The house was quiet, but not dead. Walter used to say, "Let the quiet be your spine, not your grave." I breathed. Then I reached into the drawer where we kept our original legal documents. They were all there, filed, preserved, real. I touched the envelope that held the original power of attorney, still signed, still witnessed, by Walter and our old family friend, Judge Kincaid. Walter never trusted digital versions. I used to tease him for it. But now I could almost feel him beside me, that old bony hand tapping my shoulder as if to say, "Told you." Ink over pixels, Margot, I rose. And this time, I didn't take the car. I walked. I needed the ground under my feet. I needed the sidewalk cracks, the sound of a bird cawing too early, the ache in my knees. All of it reminded me I was real, still here, still mine. When I finally entered the building where the meeting was scheduled, the receptionist looked up, startled. "Miss Bennett, you're early." I nodded, and as I stepped through the threshold of the conference room, I saw him, Nathan, standing with his back turned, mid-sentence, laughing with the estate agent. Then he turned, saw me, and in that instant, he went white and couldn't stand up. As I stepped back into the house, my fingers brushed against the inside pocket of Walter's coat, right where the document now sat, pressed flat against the soft flannel lining. And that was all it took. That small, familiar gesture. And suddenly, I was standing in a different doorway. One I hadn't dared to revisit for months. It was late, nearly midnight. The hospital hallway had that too bright quiet, where even the beeps of machines sound respectful, like they, too, know death is nearby. Walter was sitting up that night, eyes sharp despite the weight of months in that bed. His voice was gravel, but steady. He held out a folder. His hands shook, just slightly. And tucked inside the folder was that same pen I now kept in the inside pocket. His old Parker pen, the one he swore wrote straighter than any lawyer he'd met. "You know where everything is," he rasped. "But this is the pension. The retirement account. I left instructions, but I trust you to do what feels right." I sat down beside him. The curtain had been pulled, soft and beige, shielding us from the world. And for a moment, we were back in our living room, decades earlier, arguing about whether to plant rosemary or hydrangeas by the window. "Walter," I whispered, "I don't want this. I want you." He reached for my hand, skin against skin, dry warmth. He tapped my wrist lightly, where my watch used to sit before I stopped. "Wearing it. I know. But you'll need this when I'm not here." And then, he did something strange. He pulled out a second paper. Clipped to it was a single-page letter, and beneath it, a one-page form with banking details. A fund, a donation, unused. "I set aside part of the pension for an ALS research grant," he murmured. "Not in my name. Just a quiet thing. No one's claimed it yet. It's just sitting." I remember blinking. It was the first I'd heard of it. "Why not tell Nathan?" I asked. Walter's face didn't harden. It didn't fall. It just settled. Because not everything good needs applause, and not everything quiet is weak. Besides, I knew you'd understand better than he would. That last line had stayed with me, echoed even now in the rhythm of my breath as I stood in our foyer, coat still on, keys untouched on the hook. Walter trusted me, not just with money, with meaning. And Nathan didn't even ask where the folder went. He never asked about Walter's wishes, only the estate, the assets, the what's mine of it all. I walked down the hall toward our bedroom. Walter's slippers were still tucked under the edge of the dresser, exactly where he'd left them the week before he went to hospice. And I'd never moved them. I knelt, not out of ceremony, but because suddenly my knees gave. I wept, not loudly, not like the movies. It was quieter than that, the kind of cry that folds you in, like a small animal trying to disappear into its own fur. I pulled the Parker pen from my pocket, uncapped it, wrote one word on the back of an envelope. Why? Then I crossed it out. Because I already knew. Nathan hadn't always been like this. He'd been shy as a boy, needy as a teen, ambitious as a man. But somewhere between marriage and money, He started speaking to me like I was an obstacle, not a mother. Walter had seen it too, but he never said it out loud. He just left clues, quiet ones, like the grant, like the copy of the power of attorney with only my signature, never handed to Nathan, like the handwritten note taped to the back of our safe that read, "Some things aren't meant to be divided. Some things are meant to be honored." I had ignored those clues, believing that if I loved Nathan hard enough, he'd turn back toward me. But love isn't a lever. You don't pull it to move someone. You hold it. You let it speak when you can't. I stood up, placed the pen gently back in the pocket, beside the forged document, and I made a choice. I would go to the lawyer, but not as a confused old woman who'd been tricked. I would go as Walter's wife, as the legal custodian of his intentions, as the woman he trusted to do what was right. I would go not to protect myself, but to protect what Walter left behind that truly mattered. Not just property, but principle. The coat still clung to my shoulders. I hadn't even changed my shoes. I walked past the grandfather clock, past the muted ticking of its brass hands, and into Walter's study. My study now, I supposed. The light from the hallway spilled across the desk. I didn't turn on the lamp. The silence was enough. I picked up the house phone, the same cordless receiver Walter refused to replace. Taped to the back was a number in his handwriting, Jacobson-Direct. I dialed. My fingers didn't shake. Not yet. 2 rings. Then, Jacobson. His voice was clipped, cautious, East Coast bred, the kind of tone that rarely bent, even for grief. "It's Margot Bennett." There was a pause, the kind of pause that says, "I didn't expect to hear from you," or worse, "I thought it was too late." "Mrs. Bennett, I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said simply. He waited, and so did I. It had always been our unspoken rule. Walter, Jacobson, and I. No small talk when there's fire behind the door. "I need to ask you about a power of attorney document," I said. "One that may not be legitimate." The pause that followed was longer. I heard him exhale, slow through his nose. "I was going to call you," he said, but I wasn't sure if it was appropriate yet. I didn't answer. "Your son," he continued, "Nathan, submitted a transfer request to the court regarding Walter's joint estate assets. He attached what he claims is an updated power of attorney signed by you, dated 7 months ago." My throat tightened. And the notary seal is valid. But the signature, it looked off. I had my assistant pull the original POA, filed with our office 3 years ago. I waited. It didn't match, Mrs. Bennett. Not the signature, not the witness, not even the font. It's a template from a download site. He let the words hang there. Let them breathe. "He used the old copy to claim urgency," he added. "But without your explicit reauthorization, the court can't proceed." "So the court hasn't approved it yet?" "No, but they've set a hearing date." October 14th. That was in 3 weeks. I looked at the calendar. Walter had circled that date in blue pen weeks before he died. He hadn't told me why. "Did he say I agreed?" I asked quietly. "He attached a note, claimed you were emotionally unwell and didn't wish to be burdened with financial decisions. He wrote that you had verbally confirmed consent to proceed." I leaned against the desk. The cold wood against my hip was the only thing anchoring me. "I never said those words." Jacobson's voice softened, but not by much. "Then I need to ask plainly. Has your son, at any point, acted with your legal consent regarding this transfer? I looked at the Parker pen sitting on the desk. I could still see Walter holding it in his hand, signing checks with a flick of his wrist that always looked like calligraphy. I used to think, I began, that silence was the same as consent. That staying quiet meant I was cooperating. Jacobson didn't interrupt. That was the kind of man he was, measured, deliberate. But it's not, I continued. Silence is just silence. I never said yes. I never gave him permission to act on my behalf. Then we'll need to move quickly. I nodded, forgetting for a moment he couldn't see me. We'll contest the submission, he said. But you'll need to sign an affidavit. And we should talk about Walter's grant fund. He listed you as the sole custodian. I closed my eyes. Walter had always been a step ahead, careful with his words, but clear in his intentions. Do you still have the original POA? I asked. I do. Filed, notarized, witnessed. It holds, then let's use it. There was something final in the way I said it, like a stone landing in water. Understood, Jacobson said. You'll come by tomorrow? Yes. First thing. We hung up without pleasantries. There was no need. I sat there for a moment longer, the receiver still in my hand, resting against the sleeve of Walter's coat. Then I opened the drawer and pulled out a fresh notepad. I clicked Walter's Parker pen to life and wrote, in large, firm letters, October 14th, I will be there. The coat still hung on the back of the cedar closet door. It smelled faintly of cedar chips, cardamom, and the aftershave Walter only wore on Sundays. I ran my hand across the wool sleeve, thick, sturdy, and stitched by Walter himself the winter he'd taken a tailoring class, just to prove he could do something entirely new in his 60s. There, right above the left cuff, was the tiny W he'd embroidered with uneven thread. He said it stood for winter. I knew better. I slipped it on, letting the sleeves hang heavy past my wrists. Then, slowly, I turned each cuff twice and tied them gently, not in a bow, but in a quiet, deliberate knot. Walter used to say, a knot only holds if you trust the tension. Maybe that's what I needed now. A bit of tension I could rely on. The house was quiet, but not still. A breeze slipped through the kitchen window, carrying with it the clinking sound of the wind chimes on the porch. I followed it, step by step, back toward the study. Walter's desk was as he left it, half-filled crossword, glasses folded beside his book on seed banks, a note in the margin that read, Page 78, Ask Margot. I didn't know what the question was. I just liked that he left room for me there. I opened the drawer on the left, the one with the false bottom only he and I knew about. It took 2 taps along the edge and a press from underneath. There it was, his Parker pen, polished silver and black, laid across a folded linen cloth like it was waiting for its cue. Walter had used that pen to sign every letter, every check, every donation slip. I took it in my hand. It was heavier than I remembered. Next to it was a slim brown folder, no markings on the front. I opened it slowly. Inside, our joint trust agreement, updated the year Nathan moved back home. Walter's ALS research endowment paperwork. The real power of attorney, notarized with my original signature, and a single photograph of the 3 of us, me, Walter, and Nathan, taken on Nathan's graduation day. Walter had drawn a small line under Nathan's name in pen. I never noticed that before. I held the photo for a beat, then turned it face down and tucked it inside. I slid the documents into a plain manila envelope and set it aside. Then I opened another drawer, my drawer, and pulled out a slim, rose-colored folder. Inside it, I placed copies of every document I was taking, and one I wasn't. The ALS fund. No one had mentioned it yet. Nathan probably didn't even know it existed. Walter had listed me as the sole custodian. The grant money was untouched, preserved, waiting for an institution to finish vetting the research proposal. That fund wasn't about legacy or wealth. It was about Walter, his mind, his fight, his quiet refusal to let illness take more than it already had. And it wasn't going to be a bargaining chip in some courtroom. I closed the rose folder, sealed it with tape, and walked it down the hallway, past the linen cabinet, past the old photos of Walter's parents, past the sketch Nathan drew when he was 10 and called Mom's favorite tree. I stepped into the small storage room at the back of the house. In the corner, behind the Christmas decorations, was an old recipe box. I pulled it forward, lifted the lid, and slid the rose folder beneath the recipes. I replaced the lid, then paused. I reached up and touched the edge of the doorframe. That room, this house, was filled with thresholds. Not just physical ones, but emotional ones too. Every hallway Walter built with his hands. Every doorframe he reinforced after a storm. Every stair he told me to hold steady on when my knees started hurting in the winter. I stepped back, closing the door behind me with a soft click. Then I walked toward the front of the house. The manila envelope sat quietly on the bench by the door, next to my handbag. I picked it up, slid the envelope inside, and zipped it shut. Before I opened the door, I took one last look in the hallway mirror. Walter's coat fit more like armor than clothing now. The sleeves were tied, the shoulders squared, and in my right hand I held the Parker pen, clipped to a small notebook with the court date written in black ink. I stepped outside. The morning air was brisk. Leaves crunched under my feet. Across the street, a mother was tying her daughter's shoelaces. The world, it seemed, kept moving. I stood on the top step, looking out. This was my threshold. One step forward would be for me, not for Nathan, not for what others thought I could endure, but for what I had decided not to accept any longer. I stepped down and kept walking. I arrived 6 minutes early. The receptionist looked up from her monitor, blinked twice, and said, "Meeting room B. They're already inside." Of course they were. That was Nathan's favorite tactic. Show up first, reframe the setting, position himself as the calm, collected one. I adjusted the knot on Walter's coat sleeve, gave one final squeeze to the handle of my bag, and walked toward the glass doors. The corridor leading to the room was too quiet. Carpet swallowed each footstep. The overhead lights buzzed. I paused in front of the door. The metal handle was cold. Through the frosted glass, I saw 3 silhouettes: Nathan, his wife Chelsea, and Jacobson. When I opened the door, all 3 looked up. Nathan rose to his feet. "Mom," he said smoothly, like this was brunch. "We weren't sure you'd—" "I'm here." I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. Nathan gestured to the chair across from him. "Why don't you sit?" "You must be—" "No, thank you." I'll stand. His smile faltered for just a second, just enough. Jacobson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Bennett, thank you for coming. I thought—" "You thought I wasn't aware of what's happening?" There was a long pause. Even Chelsea shifted uncomfortably. Nathan jumped in, voice soft, rehearsed. "Mom, this isn't an ambush. It's a transition discussion. We've been thinking about what's best for you, for your future." I tilted my head. "And you believe that future includes stripping me of decision-making authority over the estate your father and I built?" He didn't blink. "You've always been practical. I thought, if we could streamline things, you could focus on rest, travel. Whatever you wanted, rest, I echoed slowly. If resting means being placed into the trust structure of my own assets while I'm still breathing, I suppose I'm not tired yet. Nathan's lips parted. He hadn't expected resistance. Not here, not in front of Jacobson. I set my bag down, unzipped the top, and withdrew a manila folder. Calmly, I laid it on the table and opened it. Inside was the notarized power of attorney from 2020, signed with Walter's pen, with witnesses present, and documented through our longtime legal office. I slid it across the table toward Jacobson. His eyes narrowed, then widened. This is the original? Yes, I said clearly, and this is the only valid version. Everything else filed after Walter passed, especially the document Nathan submitted last month, is fabricated. Chelsea's eyes darted toward Nathan. Nathan leaned forward. That's a serious accusation. Are you sure you're feeling... Don't. Just that one word. Quiet. Even. Final. I turned to Jacobson. I had the digital records traced. The POA file submitted online to your office was uploaded from a masked IP address, routed through a server. Farm in Nevada. Using a virtual machine, Jacobson blinked. That's highly specific. Because I hired someone highly specific, and because Nathan is too smart to forge a signature on paper. But digital trails? I looked at my son. You always underestimated metadata. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Jacobson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed now. Nathan, do you have a response to this? I was told it was valid. Chelsea and I thought... Chelsea interjected quickly. We just wanted to simplify the estate, Mr. Jacobson. We didn't mean to go behind anyone's back. No, I said quietly. You meant to erase me. Cleanly. Legally. So it wouldn't look like theft. Just paperwork. Nathan's face reddened. That's not fair. What part? I asked, finally sitting down. The part where you forged documents? Or the part where you believed I wouldn't notice? No one spoke. I placed the Parker pen on the table between us. Walter's initials glinted under the fluorescent light. This pen signed every donation we ever made, every tuition check, every medical authorization. And when your father handed me this coat, I touched the sleeve gently. He said, I trust you to know what's worth protecting. Nathan looked away. Chelsea stared at the table. Jacobson picked up the original POA again, examined the seal, the signature, then sighed. Well, this changes things. Yes, I said. It does. He turned to Nathan. If this is the true document of record, then I'm obliged to honor it. All proceedings based on the later submission are now suspended. Nathan's voice was quieter now. Mom, I didn't mean for it to come to this. You wanted control, I said simply. And you thought I was too sentimental, too old, or too tired to stop you. He swallowed hard. I leaned forward. You know, I was once afraid of being alone. That if I said no, I'd lose you too. His head lifted slightly. But then I realized what I'd lose by staying silent was far worse. There it was again. Silence. But this time it wasn't fear. It was clarity. I stood. This meeting is over. Mr. Jacobson, thank you for your time. I collected the Parker pen, zipped my folder, and walked to the door. Nathan didn't follow. Chelsea didn't move. When I stepped out into the hallway, the light felt sharper. And I didn't look back. I didn't leave right after the meeting. Instead, I asked Jacobson to remain behind. Just a few minutes. Nathan and Chelsea were already gathering their things, avoiding eye contact as they quietly slipped out the side door. Once the door latched shut behind them, I opened my bag again. This time, I didn't take out a folder. I pulled out a sealed envelope. Thick, worn at the corners. I held it for a moment, then passed it across the table. Jacobson raised his eyebrows. "What's this?" "Something you should have had 2 weeks ago, but I needed to see if you'd ask the right questions first." He opened it slowly, revealing a signed, notarized affidavit. At the top, statement of concern regarding unauthorized POA filing, prepared by Margot W. Bennett. He scanned the first page, then the second, pausing when he reached the attachment stapled to the back. His brows furrowed. This is a transcript." "Yes." I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "A transcript from a recorded call between Nathan and a freelance notary in Henderson, Nevada. He thought he could expedite things digitally. Unfortunately for him, the notary required a verification call, and I had that call legally intercepted through a third party before it ever reached your office." Jakobsen looked up, his face more pale now than cautious. "You're saying your son knowingly?" "Yes," I said evenly. "He knowingly submitted falsified documentation to seize legal control of my estate. And he did it under the assumption I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't know what to do." Jacobson sat back. "Mrs. Bennett, you don't have to say it." I waved gently. "But I need you to do something instead." I pulled out the original POA again. This time, I laid it beside a new document. A 1-page letter of revocation I had prepared, signed, and witnessed. "I'd like to formally revoke all standing powers of attorney, effective immediately. From this moment forward, no one, no family member, no agent, speaks on my behalf but me. All access is suspended, all authority terminated. I will handle the assets myself." He exhaled slowly, nodding. "I can file this today." "Good," I replied. "And I'd like digital confirmation of the filing, sent directly to my encrypted inbox, not printed, not CC'd." He nodded again, scribbling notes now. But then he paused. "Do you want to pursue legal charges?" I looked at him, and I knew my answer. "No," I said. "I want something stronger than punishment." He blinked. "Stronger?" "Yes." I leaned in slightly. "I want distance. I want restoration. And I want Nathan to feel the full weight of being cut off. Not legally, not publicly. Just personally. No courtroom will teach him what's silence." Will Jakobsen said nothing for a long moment. He only looked at me, truly looked, like a man finally seeing the difference between a woman who's wounded and a woman who's awake. I could feel it in my chest, the shift. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. He cleared his throat. "I'll handle everything on my end." "I know you will." I took the Parker pen from my coat pocket and signed the revocation at the bottom, with the same handwriting I used to sign school forms, medical waivers, property deeds. Jacobsen glanced down at the signature and smiled faintly. "That's steady." I met his eyes. "It's always been steady. Just quiet." When I stood to leave, I didn't rush. I tucked the pen back into my pocket, buttoned the coat. Before I opened the door, I turned once more. "There's one more thing," I said. He looked up. "The trust Walter left for ALS research, it's never been touched. I want it protected. Permanently. Set up a lock structure. No changes, no movement, no signatures, except mine. I'll assign a secondary trustee, but it won't be Nathan. It won't be family." Jacobsen nodded. "Understood. And Jacobsen," I added softly, "I don't want you to pity me." "I don't," he said simply. "I respect you." I gave him a small smile. And then, as I stepped back into the corridor, The sound of my shoes on the polished floor echoed like footsteps I hadn't heard in years. I didn't go home after the meeting. Instead, I walked 2 blocks to the old library, the one Walter and I used to take Nathan to when he was little. He loved the second-floor reading room, where the windows creaked in the winter and the chairs made that soft hush when you slid them back. The place was almost empty that day, just the way I needed it. I took a seat at one of the long oak tables, then unzipped the flat envelope I'd kept hidden in the lining of my coat. Not the main pocket. Not even the inside flap. The lining. A seam I had sewn shut myself just after Walter passed. Inside was a manila folder, slightly worn, a little frayed at the corner, but clean, intact. On the front, Walter's handwriting. Thick blue ink, almost too heavy for the page. ALS Research Fund, Legacy Draft. I hadn't looked at it in nearly a year, but I knew every line by heart. Walter had written it during his final winter in that quiet period after the diagnosis, but before the machines. He'd always been a practical man, not cold, just steady. "I can't give them a cure," he told me once, "but maybe I can make sure someone else gets closer." He never got to submit the documents. He passed before the foundation partnership call came. And after that, I'd left it to Nathan to handle. He said he would. But months later, when I'd asked about it, Nathan simply said, "We've decided it's best to pause. The market's volatile. Better to consolidate first." Something about the word we had sat wrong with me, but I said nothing, until now. I placed the documents flat on the table. Financial breakdowns, research endowment structures, matching grant plans. Walter had done it all. And tucked in the very back, paper-clipped and faded, was a sticky note in my husband's slanted handwriting. "If I don't make it, M will know what to do." I stared at that note for a long time. Longer than I care to admit. Then I opened my laptop, typed in the encrypted portal address, and began the transfer. The funds had been moved out of the general account just 6 weeks ago. Nathan's doing, I assumed. But he hadn't touched this portion. Not because he forgot, because he didn't know it existed. I'd split the deposits, one to the family trust, one to a quiet holding account under my maiden name. The ALS seed fund had remained untouched, safe, waiting. It took me 43 minutes to complete the application to the nonprofit consortium Walter had earmarked. They still existed, still accepted direct donor grants, and they still listed ALS-specific fellowships under priority research. I uploaded the documents, signed the letter of intent, scheduled the wire, and then I added a name to the permanent scholarship line, the Walter Bennett Endowment for ALS Research, in honor of unfinished work. I didn't cry. Not until I received the confirmation email, time-stamped 2:47 p.m., that said simply, "Funds received. Activation pending board vote. Welcome to the Legacy Circle." I sat there, in that old wooden chair, and let the silence close around me. The weight of it wasn't sorrow. It was peace. The kind that comes when something broken finds its missing piece. My phone buzzed. A message from Chelsea. Just one line. "Margot, please call when you can. Nathan is overwhelmed. I read it twice. Then put the phone away. Some lessons come late. Some never arrive. But dignity should not be negotiated. Walter used to say, 'I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving nothing that matters.' And I had almost let that fear win. Almost. I placed the file back in the envelope, then folded the sticky note and tucked it into my wallet, right behind my driver's license. So every time I opened it, I'd remember, not just Walter, but myself. That evening, I returned home and made tea. Jasmine, his favorite. I sat on the porch, wrapped in the gray coat he gave me the year Nathan left for college, and watched the wind move through the garden. The lilies needed trimming, the fence needed paint, but the legacy was no longer waiting. And as I held the warm mug between my palms, I whispered softly, to no one and everyone at once, "You left because they couldn't find a cure, but I won't let them destroy the part of you that stayed. Not your name, not your work, and not my voice." I stood. The chair made the faintest scrape against the polished wood floor. Nathan flinched at the sound. He looked up, lips parted like he was about to speak, but nothing came. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "I didn't mean to," not even my name. And I didn't give him a chance to find the words. I gathered the documents into my satchel, slow and methodical. The click of the buckle echoed louder than it should have in that room. The sunlight had shifted. The conference room window now framed the edge of late afternoon. Everything was in soft light. Muted gold. Dust catching the air. I adjusted the strap across my shoulder and turned toward the door. Nathan moved slightly, half rising from his chair, his mouth twitching as if to stop me. But I didn't stop. He said my name, finally. Soft, almost uncertain. "Mom." I paused for half a breath, not to answer, just to register the sound of it one last time. How quickly the same word can lose its weight. Then I opened the door. The hallway outside was cool, dimmer than I remembered. The kind of hallway that eats sound. Nothing echoed. My footsteps tapped steadily down the tile. Not rushed, not hesitant. Steady. I passed the framed photos along the wall. Certificates of ethics. Smiling law partners in stiff suits. One of them was Jacobson, much younger, shaking hands with someone in front of a courthouse. It didn't matter. None of it did. The echo of my steps followed behind me like a second presence, calmer than I felt. Halfway down the corridor, I passed a receptionist, typing quietly. She glanced up, gave me a polite smile, then returned to her screen. Not one person stopped me. Not one voice called me back. And that, strangely, was the closure I didn't know I needed. At the end of the hall, there was a glass door with a brass handle. The sun had warmed the metal. I could feel it in my palm as I reached out and pulled. The threshold was just a small lip of marble, barely an inch tall. But as I stepped over it, I felt the weight of everything fall behind me. Not disappear, just shift. Behind that door was the version of me who doubted, who'd hesitated, who once thought silence was survival. That version didn't walk out with me. Outside, the sky had turned that specific shade of late-day blue, the kind that only shows up in early spring. The air had a bite to it, but not cruel, just enough to wake the skin. I tightened the strap on my shoulder, pulled Walter's coat a little closer around me, and I walked, not away, but forward. The house felt too clean when I returned, not tidy, sterile, as if no one had truly lived here in a long time. The faint smell of wood polish clung to the hallway, lingering like a ghost. I slipped off Walter's coat and hung it on the back of the kitchen chair. The chair across from it remained empty. It always did. I made myself dinner, if you could call it that. A boiled egg, a slice of toast, a few steamed carrots, not because I had no appetite, but because anything more felt performative. Who was I cooking for now? The clock above the stove ticked with the kind of authority I once reserved for courtroom judges. Every second a quiet accusation. I sat at the table and took a bite, chewed, swallowed. stared at the opposite chair, and then I said aloud, "This is what you wanted, Nathan?" The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. After a few more bites, I stood, took the plate to the sink, washed it with more attention than necessary. Then I walked toward the hallway closet, the one we hadn't opened in months. There, in a worn cardboard box, were the albums. I pulled the one labeled Winter Holidays and carried it back to the table. Dust puffed slightly as I flipped the cover. Page after page of construction paper crafts, glittered reindeer, awkward handwriting. And then I found it. A card from when Nathan was 8, green crayon tree on the front. A stick figure holding hands with a woman in a blue dress. Inside, in shaky capital letters, M.O.M., I will always protect you, I promise. Love, Nathan. I traced the letters with my fingertip. The A in always had been drawn backward. I remember that. He was proud of the drawing, not the grammar. I remembered the night he made it. He'd overheard Walter and me arguing over a hospital bill. He'd burst in, waving the card like a white flag. Told us both to stop. Told me, "When I grow up, I'll take care of you." I had believed him. Or maybe I wanted to believe him. I turned the page. Another card. Years later, high school, pencil sketch of our house. Caption, "Home is where Mom is." I closed the album, set it down on the table, rested both hands on the cover as if holding a heartbeat. What changed? Number. That's not the right question. When did it change? Was it college? When he stopped coming home for Thanksgiving? Was it the job? Was it the wife? Or was it quieter than that? Like fog rolling in under the door, slowly, until one day the view is gone. I whispered into the empty room. "Did you mean it, Nathan? When you said you'd protect me?" The silence answered like only silence can. And then, another thought. Colder. Sharper. Was it ever about protecting me? Or was it about controlling me? Was I the thing he loved? Or the thing he needed to manage? I pushed back the chair and stood. My legs were stiff, but not weak. I walked to the hallway mirror, looked at myself fully for the first time all day. Not just at my reflection, but at the space I occupied. I looked like my mother in that mirror, sharp around the eyes, soft around the jaw, tired, but not broken. I whispered again, this time not to the past, but to the woman staring back. "Don't confuse silence with consent, Margot." And for once, she nodded. I never saw what happened in that office, but I've imagined it again and again. The way he probably sat, alone, surrounded by framed smiles that hadn't felt real in years. A photo of our family at Yellowstone. Walter still strong. Nathan still small enough to ride on his father's shoulders. Another from his wedding. Too polished. Too posed. His smile hadn't quite reached his eyes that day. Maybe it was the way his assistant paused outside the frosted glass door, her hand hovering before knocking. Maybe she sensed the tension. Or maybe she didn't want to interrupt grief in disguise. When she finally stepped in, she might have said something casual. "Everything okay, Mr. Bennett?" And I imagine Nathan didn't answer right away. His hand resting on a manila folder. The folder from the meeting, the one that now had nothing useful in it. Nothing manipulative left to hold. She might have shifted awkwardly, then tried again. "Is it settled? With your mother?" He probably gave her a tight smile, a nod, and still didn't say yes. Because how do you explain that the person who taught you what trust is was the same person who just reminded you what boundaries are? When she left, I picture him turning his chair slowly toward the window, hands in his lap, breathing shallow. the weight of something he couldn't name pressing behind his ribs. And then, maybe, just maybe, he reached for his wallet. That leather one he never changed, the one I gave him for college graduation. Inside, in the creased plastic sleeve, there's still a picture of me. A small, faded photo from a farmer's market. I'm holding a basket of peaches, laughing. He must have been 10 when he took it. He told me once he kept it there, just in case. Just in case of what? I like to think he stared at that picture longer than he meant to, that he noticed how my hair used to shine silver in the sun, how my eyes had lines, but they were from joy, not fatigue. And I imagine that he hesitated, not because he felt guilty, but because he felt something worse. He felt known, even now, even after all of it. And that knowing made him quietly slide the photo back into the wallet. But this time, not in the visible slot. Number. He would have tucked it into the back, behind old receipts, buried with things too inconvenient to confront. Because that's what people do when they've convinced themselves they're right. They don't destroy the past. They just file it where they won't have to see it again. But they never throw it away. That's how regret begins. Not with fire, but with filing cabinets. And if he went back to his desk and typed another email and led another meeting, his tie too tight, his voice too calm, I wonder if he noticed the hollow behind his ribs had only grown heavier, because the weight of what you take is never lighter than the weight of who you lost. The folding chairs were already half filled when I arrived that morning. A few women sat stiffly, their hands clasped in their laps, eyes darting across the room like they were waiting for someone to give them permission to exhale. Some wore carefully ironed blouses. Others had on sweaters that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, but they all carried the same weight in their eyes. One I recognized without asking. I stacked the handouts on the table at the front of the library meeting room. A simple flyer printed in black ink. If they say, "Let me handle it, Mom," you ask, "With whose money?" A free class on reclaiming financial dignity, taught by someone who learned the hard way. I'd written that tagline myself. It had taken me 4 hours to come up with it, and a lifetime to mean it. This wasn't a lecture. It was a conversation. One most of us had never been invited to before. I cleared my throat and began. My name is Margot Bennett. I'm not a banker. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a widow who once believed that silence was safer than asking questions. Until I realized silence can be very expensive. A few women smiled. A few others looked down at their laps, but one nodded, deeply, slowly, like I'd just named a pain she'd carried too long. I passed around a printed sheet titled, 10 Questions to Ask Before Handing Over Your Signature. We talked about power of attorney, trust accounts, red flags that don't come in envelopes, like when your name disappears from your own banking app, or when your adult children say, "You don't need to worry about all that." A woman in the second row raised her hand. She wore a light pink scarf and orthopedic shoes. "What if the accounts are already gone?" she asked. I looked her in the eyes. "Then we find out where they went." And we start again. A pause. And what if the person who took them is your child? The air in the room changed. I let it sit for a moment. Then I said, "I know that ache. It's not just about money, is it? It's about feeling like your voice was treated like clutter, something they meant to clean up when they got around to it." She blinked fast, and I nodded once more. We start again anyway. After class, a few women lingered. One handed me a tin of lemon cookies. Another asked if I could help her scan old documents. Then a woman with gray curls and a cane approached slowly. Her voice was soft but steady. "Did you win?" she asked. "Against whoever tried to take it from you?" I smiled. Not the kind that meant victory, the kind that meant clarity. "Legally, yes," I said. "Emotionally, I'm still learning." She reached out and took my hand. "So then, did you ever forgive them?" That question stayed in the air like perfume, too tender to rush. I looked at her, and I told the truth. I forgave myself first. She held my gaze, and then, without saying another word, she nodded, tucked my flyer into her purse, and walked out into the afternoon sun. The sun had already dipped low when I finished writing. I didn't rush. Every word deserved to arrive slowly, without judgment, without defense, just presence. The kind I once hoped Nathan would offer me when I got older, when my hands began to shake pouring tea, or when I couldn't remember the name of that one bird that used to nest by our window. I folded the letter into thirds, not with precision, but care. The kind you give to something that might never be seen, but still matters. I slipped it into a simple white envelope. No name on the front, just the weight of what hadn't been said. Then I opened the hall closet, the one with the creaky hinge, and reached for the old blue tin. It used to hold lemon shortbread cookies Walter bought every spring from the bakery on Linden Street. Nathan was 10 when he first found the tin and asked, "Can I keep my treasures in here?" We let him. Back then, he thought bottle caps and baseball cards could change the world. I pressed the lid closed and held it to my chest for a moment. Then I grabbed a small garden trowel and stepped outside. The dusk air was cool, almost still. No wind, only the faint hum of crickets and the slow breath of early autumn. I walked to the side yard, past the fence, past the corner where Walter used to plant sunflowers every year, even after his back began to stiffen. The Dalan Huang was in bloom. I never knew the English name, hyacinth maybe, but Walter loved their fragrance, said they smelled like hope. Even when the ALS took his ability to speak, he would lean toward them in spring and close his eyes. I knelt slowly, my knees protesting like old hinges, and pushed aside the loose mulch with my hands. The soil underneath was damp and soft. I dug until the hole was just wide enough. Then I whispered, not into the ground, but to the air. "If one day you are at peace enough to come back, Nathan, you'll know where to find me." I placed the tin inside the earth, covered it gently, pressed down the soil with the flat of my palm, and sat back. The sky was bleeding orange and lavender by then, the kind of sunset that doesn't ask for attention, just offers beauty and lets you decide what to do with it. I stayed there a while. I didn't cry. I didn't rehearse any version of a conversation that would never come. I just breathed. The letter inside that tin didn't ask for anything. Not an apology, not a reunion, not even acknowledgement. Just the truth. The truth that I had once loved a boy who made Christmas cards with his tiny hands, who said he would always protect me, who believed I was the safest place in the world, and that somewhere along the path to becoming a man, he started believing he needed to own what he couldn't protect. It took me too long to understand that wasn't about me. It was about fear, and maybe ambition, and a world that whispers to sons, if you don't take control, someone else will. The letter ended with only 2 lines. "I am still your mother, but now I am also mine. That doesn't cancel you. It saves me." I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. As I turned back toward the house, I felt something shift. Not in the garden, not in the air, but in me. I hadn't buried grief. I had planted closure. And whether or not it ever grew into forgiveness, it had a place, a root, a beginning. I walked back inside, not expecting anything, just breathing in the scent of hyacinth behind me, the scent of hope, whether or not it's ever found. It was an ordinary Thursday morning. The library hall smelled faintly of old paper and lemon wood polish. I had just finished setting up for our 10 a.m. class, 7 folding chairs in a loose circle, a pitcher of water on the side table, and a stack of handouts, titled, Financial Clarity After 50. Your Voice Still Matters. I was adjusting the curtains to let in more light when I noticed movement near the entryway. A man stood at the bulletin board. His back was to me, but there was something about his posture, still but not stiff, like someone trying to be invisible without looking afraid. He wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored, crisp. The kind men wear when they want to look put together, but not too proud. His hair had more gray in it than I remembered, and he'd lost some weight. But I knew that back. I knew those hands. One of them reached up and took one of our flyers, the green one with the bold serif font. If they say, "Let me handle it," ask gently, "With whose money?" He read it. Slowly, then folded it evenly, with the kind of care that comes not from habit, but from guilt. He slipped it into his inside pocket. Still, he didn't turn around. He glanced once at the room, saw me across the shelves, but didn't meet my eyes. And I didn't call out his name. Not because I was angry, not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood the kind of healing that doesn't need words. The kind where silence is no longer distance, but space. He lingered a moment longer, then nodded. Toward the bulletin board, toward the air between us, I couldn't tell, and walked away. He didn't take a chair. He didn't open his mouth. He didn't offer a performance of remorse or redemption, but he had come. That was something. The door clicked shut behind him. And still, I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to the spot where he had stood. The bulletin board still held 3 more flyers. I smoothed them gently, as if straightening the corners could somehow make the message clearer. One of the women from the class came in a few minutes later. "Everything all right, Margot?" I nodded, just adjusting the light. We began. That day's topic was trusts and when to revoke them, and the women laughed more than usual. There's a comfort in not having to pretend anymore, in naming the things that once shamed you and realizing, no, you were never the broken one. Afterward, when everyone had gone, I sat for a moment in the quiet and let myself replay it. Not the courtroom drama I used to imagine, not the confrontation with tears or shouting or reconciliation under dramatic music. Just this, a man reading his mother's words on a public bulletin board in a building that never asked him to come. That was enough. Sometimes we wait so long for closure to sound like an apology that we forget it can also look like someone showing up quietly, alone, with their hands in their pockets and a flyer pressed close to their chest. Lily was waiting on my porch when I came home from the library one afternoon. She was wearing an oversized college hoodie and clutching a composition notebook like it held the secrets of the universe. Her sneakers tapped nervously against the wooden step, but her face lit up when she saw me. "Miss Bennett, I was wondering if you had a moment," she said. I smiled. "Of course. Come in." She followed me into the sunroom where the late afternoon light cast soft lines across the floorboards. I set the kettle on and motioned for her to sit. Lily lived 3 houses down, 17, maybe 18. Her mother worked nights, and I'd seen Lily walk her younger brother to school more times than I could count. She was sharp, quietly so, and carried herself with a kind of guarded grace that reminded me too much of myself at her age. She opened the notebook. "I saw the flyer from your class. I don't have a retirement account or anything, obviously, but I've been trying to figure out how to make my paycheck last. I want to help Mom more, but I also don't want to feel like I'm drowning before I even start." I nodded, listening as she spoke, half apologetic, half defiant, like asking for help was a crime she'd already forgiven herself for. We started with the basics: income, fixed costs, variables, the envelope method. She wrote carefully, small, neat letters in blue ink. When we got to the section titled Essentials, I asked, "Who do you usually think of first when you spend money?" She paused, tapping her pen against the page. Then she wrote, 1. Mom, groceries, prescriptions, bus fare. 2. Kyle, school shoes. 3. Rent. 4. Me, books, toothpaste, socks. My eyes lingered on that fourth line. Lily noticed. "Is that wrong?" "No," I said gently. "But can I show you something?" I reached over and slid the notebook toward me. I circled the word me and drew an arrow, not to the bottom, but to the top. Then I added 0, you, stability, peace, sleep, choice. She looked at it and blinked slowly, as if seeing her name that high up felt foreign. "I used to forget to write my own name in my plans too," I said, "when I was younger and even when I was older. I thought being strong meant being last." "What changed?" she asked. I smiled, folding the edge of her page back gently. "Life taught me that strength isn't measured by how much of yourself you give away, but by how gently you choose to keep what matters." We sat in silence for a moment as the kettle hissed. She didn't cry. Neither did I. But there was a stillness in the room, a shared understanding. Two women, separated by 4 decades and a dozen life lessons, both learning how to put themselves back on the page. Before she left, she looked at me and asked, "Do you think it's selfish to want to feel safe?" "No," I said. "I think it's brave." The kettle sang gently in the kitchen, an old, familiar sound that had grown softer over the years, like an elder humming a tune they no longer needed to remember the words to. I reached for the porcelain teapot Walter gave me on our 25th anniversary. Ivory with faded blue roses and a small chip on the spout. Earned during a move we never meant to make. I never replaced it. Some things don't need fixing to stay precious. I placed 2 cups on the tray out of habit, then paused. One would do. I poured the hot water over the tea leaves, Earl Grey, his favorite, and watched the steam curl upward like something sacred. Then I carried the tray to the small table by the window and opened the glass pane. It was early. The kind of early that feels like a held breath, the sky not yet decided if it would turn to gold or gray. Somewhere, a bird dared the stillness with a single call, hesitant but hopeful. I sat down, lifted the cup, and let the warmth settle into my fingers. Across the street, a young mother adjusted her baby's hat before buckling him into the stroller. Her coat was frayed at the hem, but her hands were steady. I smiled, unseen. There were years when I didn't know how to be alone with myself without feeling like I had failed someone. Now, silence was not absence, it was presence, of a quieter kind. Walter used to say that everyone needs a small ritual to remind them they belong to themselves. This was mine. A cup of tea, a cracked window, one steady breath, and sometimes a prayer. Not to any particular god or saint, but to the part of the universe that still listens when no one else does. So I closed my eyes and whispered, if there is anyone out there tonight who's been made to feel small, forgotten, inconvenient, if there's someone who sat at the edge of a family photo and wondered when they disappeared, if there's someone who gave and gave and gave and is now sitting in a kitchen wondering what they still have left, please let them find this story. Not because it's loud, not because it's perfect, but because it is real. And real things still matter. I let the words hang there. Then I placed the cup down and picked up my notebook. Thin pages, well-worn spine, cover that still smelled faintly of dust and cedar. The last entry I'd written was weeks ago, but today felt different. Not heavy, not light, just clear. I wrote, freedom is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like a quiet cup of tea poured for one. Sometimes it sounds like a woman learning to budget her own breath. Sometimes it feels like walking through a door without turning back. Not because there's nothing behind you, but because what's ahead finally makes sense. I set the pen down beside the cup. The sky outside had begun to shift, blue seeping gently into the gray, like someone opening their eyes after a long sleep. I thought of Nathan, not with anger, not with longing, but with the softness that comes after you've accepted that some things will never be what they could have been. That's okay. I thought of Lily, too, of her penciled budget, her eyes as she whispered, is it selfish to feel safe? No, Lily. It's sacred. I took a sip of tea, and then, for the first time since Walter died, I whispered not to him, not to the wind, but to myself. I'm still here, and I still count. And if you're watching, yes, you, wherever you are, if you've ever doubted your worth because someone didn't see it, if you've been made to feel like your time is over, your voice too quiet, your name forgotten, let this be your reminder. You are not an afterthought. You are the page someone's waiting to turn. You are the cup that fills again. You are not too late, and you are not alone. If this story finds you, let it stay with you. And if it helps, share it. Maybe someone else is standing at their own threshold, waiting for a sign that it's okay to walk through it, alone, proud, whole. This might be that sign. Margot Bennett. I am not Nathan's mother anymore. I am not Walter's wife anymore. I am Margot, and I am the one who signed the final letter. It's strange, the peace that comes when you stop chasing roles that were never meant to contain your whole self. There was a time I thought motherhood was my full name. That being a wife meant the rest of me didn't need tending. That saying yes quietly was how love survived. But now, I know better. I know that love is not a ledger, that silence is not consent, and that dignity, once lost, can be reclaimed, even in the smallest of ways, not with grand speeches, not with shouting, but with a door gently closed, a letter not mailed, a life softly rewritten. And I suppose if you've stayed until now, you understand that too. So let me say this clearly, because no one said it to me when I needed to hear it. You are not the role someone gave you. You are not the mistake they never let you forget. You are not the bank account they hope to control. You are not their plan B. You are not too old, too soft, too late. You are a name. And that name deserves to be said with care. Mine is Margot. And now, I sign the last page not in grief, not in bitterness, but in wholeness. Signed, the woman who stayed, the woman who left, the woman who learned, the woman who lived. Beat. The screen goes black. No music at first. Then, a low, warm swell, like the sound of a memory folding itself into rest. And across that stillness, a voice, not mine, not Nathan's, not anyone's in particular, just words on a screen inviting you in. Have you ever been made to feel invisible in your own family? Was there a moment you realized you weren't the one being protected, but the one being managed? Tell us. Nana is listening. And after a breath, before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope this story stays with you, like a letter folded into your coat pocket, like a voice that says, quietly, you matter. Sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.